President Trump was elected in 2016. There was this big hubbubaloo where people were like, oh my God, Russia interfered with our elections. Do you really think Russia didn't interfere in our elections until 2016? How ignorant and stupid a thought is that? Right. If they meddled with us in 2016, they meddled with us every 4 years before that too. Right. It's just so happens that in 2016, they got caught. They pushed a little bit too hard on Facebook. They pushed a little bit too hard in Twitter at the same time that Facebook and Twitter became something that was being scrutinized heavily by the national security infrastructure, right? So Obama could have been a product of Russian meddling, right? Bush could have been a product of meddling. Every president, every congressperson, everybody elected ever, I guarantee you, foreign countries have meddled in the elections. Does that mean that the foreign country wanted to see Joe Biden elected as president? Most likely not, because the overarching strategy, the doctrine that drives most intelligence is a doctrine of anarchy versus chaos. That's the master doctrine. That's the master doctrine. That's a doctrine most people don't even know exists, right? Anarchy means the complete dissolvement, the complete dissolution of any kind of structured government at all. That's anarchy. Chaos means that you are causing friction to whatever structure exists. Two totally different things, right? What foreign countries want is not anarchy. Anarchy is unpredictable. Right. Anarchy means that there's like whole revolutions, right? Chaos is what everybody wants because chaos burns resources. Chaos is inefficient. Chaos is unpredictable. But what you can guarantee, what you can confidently predict is that chaos will distract, alienate, and burn resources. And
they want that happening to us. They want internal chaos.
Everybody wants their opponent to be trapped in chaos.
I see.
Right.
And it's much easier to do that. Let the country disintegrate within itself. Do you think that's working?
Absolutely, it's working. What's happening to Russia right now?
They're getting stronger. Well, this is what I'm reading. Again, the information that I'm watching, reading, consuming is that they are taking Ukraine without sustaining heavy casualties. They're making trade pacts with, the countries we've mentioned, including India, China, Thailand. There's a whole, South Asian trade organizations coming together, BRICS, and as well as Iran. So I think they're playing it really well. I think Putin's gotten stronger since the invasion, since the freezing of, since we basically stole a bunch of money from them. That's my perception of it.
What was the narrative 6 months after the war? 6 months after they invaded
the war
Ukraine?
Started?
Yeah. Do you remember?
Can't remember.
The exact opposite.
That he was almost,
Do you remember that?
Russia's like a couple weeks away from falling.
And Putin's got brain cancer and nobody knows about it. And his own internal people are going to oust him. Right. That was the narrative for about the first 6 months.
Right.
What's happening in Ukraine right now? Right. In Ukraine right now, Zelensky has a hard time getting support consistently from the West. Right. He's afraid of the next round of elections that are going to happen in NATO countries. Corruption has become it has now become a mainstream realization about Ukraine. That corruption existed 3 years ago too. Yeah. I was out talking to people about Ukrainian corruption like a week after that invasion started.
Could you look into the camera and talk to my parents right here that watch, all they do is consume CNN?
Yeah. CNN is lying to you. Mom and dad of Johnny.
Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell.
Yeah. If you want to watch CNN, you must also watch Fox News because the two of them are basically on par with equality of fact.
Right. Exactly. So anyways, I interrupted. How corrupt is the state of Ukraine? What is the situation now? And are these strikes that are happening, or I think
across the border,
greenlit by the Biden administration to hit inside of Russia, is this all going to lead to a nuclear conflict? That's the main thing that I don't want because I just got money.
So I earlier in our conversation, you said like we're closer to nuclear war than we've been since like the Cuban Missile Crisis.
And again, I'm a comedian. This is what I'm hearing from political scientists.
Gotcha. And if there are political scientists saying that, they're not very scientific. They're political ass clowns, right?
Okay.
We are nowhere closer to a nuclear war. I want to differentiate between a nuclear war and the triggering of a nuclear weapon. Two different things. Nuclear war means there's an exchange of nuclear weapons, multiple nuclear warheads, multiple nuclear delivery vehicles, right? Because there's multiple types of delivery vehicles to deliver warheads. That is different than a nuclear bomb being delivered in a suitcase to the center of Kiev where it's triggered remotely one time. Completely different thing, right? So here's how I see it. The superpowers of the world have no interest in exchanging nuclear blasts. Russia does not want to blow up Ukraine because if it blows up Ukraine, it's going to spend the next 60 years trying to clean up its own mess. The United States does not want to send missiles with nuclear warheads to Russia. China doesn't want to engage. Iran doesn't want to engage. North Korea doesn't. Nobody wants nuclear war.
Right.
However, depending on the situation, some countries might see an opportunity to get away with a nuclear blast. So North Korea delivering a what's called a tactical nuclear bomb through a car, through a delivery vehicle, or through a suitcase, and it happens to end up in Seoul, could be a good thing because it didn't come, there's no smoking gun that it came from North Korea. Even better, what if North Korea buys a nuclear warhead from Russia? Russia hires a Belarusian transportation company to then deliver that through China into South Korea. Now who's responsible for it? That's the world. That's the real world that we're living in now. That's why the alliances are so important. That's also why the United States has had an alliance with NATO, which we talked about this. What is the United States' relationship with NATO? U.S. is the bully. NATO does what the U.S. wants, which is why you see France falling apart, Germany falling apart. You see Bulgaria not supporting NATO policies. You see Hungary not supporting NATO policies, right? Because the world is waking up to the fact that all the U.S. has done since the 1950s is create a hegemony, which is another way of saying a big bully, a big economic bully.
So my question to you, and that was very concise, and it's what I meant to say through all my bumbling of trying to sound smart. I went to state school, man. I was a drug dealer. I took keg stands when I should have been studying. But do we need a hegemon anymore? A single hegemon?
Yes.
Okay.
We do. But we absolutely do. And if we're going to be honest, we always need a hegemon. And we always want to be the hegemonic power. We always, like, you have to accept that. If you don't accept that, you're basically accepting that you're willing to be number 2 or 3 or 7 or 12 on the food chain. And if that's where you want to be, you might as well just skip ahead of the line and go there now, right? You've got a U.S. passport. You can go live in Mexico and you can be 25th on the hierarchy. And that's fine with me because the rest of us who are here want to be the biggest superpower in the world.
So do you see us ceasing to be the hegemon? Because I've seen you online saying, once we cease to be the superpower, I'm out of here. Like, I'm literally taking my family and moving.
I'm out of here even if we stay the superpower.
Okay, go into this because my hair is standing on end. Like,
so it's not me that says that we won't be the hegemony. It's multiple economic outlooks, right? Essentially what we're having is we're watching as China is a threat to the United States, not because of Taiwan, not because they have some growing army or navy. They're a threat because they're mimicking our structure. So the U.S. makes all of its money from financial products, like New York and L.A. And technology, like you see in
Nvidia.
northern,
exporting.
Exactly. So we have an edge in technology. And we have an edge in finance. Well, China took Hong Kong because the next biggest financial center was Hong Kong. And now China's making a huge ripple or riptide right now across the world because of its growth of electronic vehicles. What China wants is to be an economic exporter of technology, independent, homegrown technology, most of which it stole from somebody else. But that's what it wants to be because China's been watching the United States. The whole time that we were engaged in a global war on terror, China wasn't engaged in a global war on terror. What they were doing was they were mimicking us in a communist authoritarian system. Well, when you have an authoritarian system, you don't have to get approval for everything, which means you can skip decades at a time. So what took us 70 years, they were able to do in 20 years. Right. So we have Apple, they have Huawei. right? We have XYZ, they have ABC.
Yeah.
It's all the same. We
Right.
have Tesla, they have whatever their 5 different electronic vehicles are. So what China wants to be able to do is just replicate the American model of exporting finance and technology.
Right.
Well, they were able to create the ability to export finance because right when Hong Kong fell, COVID broke out. So nobody stopped them.
Right.
If you recall 2019, all the headlines were talking about the police,
the uprising, and then putting it down. Yeah.
Well, now with Trump and the economic tariffs that he put on China, with Biden and the American Chip Act, what everyone's trying to do now on the US side is keep China from becoming an exporter of technology. Well, that's the threat, because as soon as China becomes an exporter of technology, it's just like having Starbucks and something else like Starbucks. Now there's a competitor. What happens when there's a competitor? The whole world gets to decide, do we keep doing business with the US or do we start doing business with China? That's what China wants. That's all the talk about, like the population crisis and the fertility crisis and all that other bull. China's people are dying too fast. They're going to have an economic crisis.
We see that every YouTube fear porn, I call it. It's all China's collapsing. You're saying that's erroneous.
Because you don't need 1.7 billion people if you are an exporter of technology.
Right.
How big is the United States? 300 million.
Right. Right.
The wealthiest country in the world is 300 million people.
Okay.
So that's all they're trying to do is create an alternative for the world, because when there's an alternative for the world, their income goes up. But what happens to the US income? It goes down.
Okay. So that's the consequence. Once China becomes a net exporter of technology, what happens to the US and how?
Correct. Now that's where we have to get real.
Okay. I'm real here, baby. I'm with you.
If the US starts to decline in terms of its economic power, meaning people are doing business in rubles and renminbi, people aren't exporting from Silicon Valley, they're exporting from Beijing or from Singapore. As soon as that happens, right, for every dollar that China makes, for every renminbi that China makes, the US loses a dollar or a renminbi, right? So all of a sudden we start reaching what's called parity.
Yeah.
Parity means equality.
Right.
When there's equality, it's guaranteed that there will be conflict, because there has to be something to differentiate during parity. Does that mean there's going to be guns and like nuclear weapons? No. It could mean tariffs. The United States just put a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles inside the United States. Think about what that means. That means we want more electric vehicles.
Yeah.
We want a greener country. Yeah. We want alternate energy, but we don't want it to come from China.
Right.
And China's creating electric vehicles at a very cheap price.
Mm-hmm.
But the United States knows that if you or I buy a $24,000 electric vehicle from China, 24,000 US dollars leave the United States.
Yeah.
They turn into renminbi and they go to China, and they don't come back, right? China, on the other hand, knows that for every $24,000 car that they sell to the United States, they get more renminbi. They get more power. That parity starts to shift. United States can't let that happen, because that makes for a new superpower. Not only that, but the United States is smart enough to realize that if China becomes a superpower, it's going to follow the same methodology that the US used to gain power and influence all over the world. They're going to become the bully. They're going to make every debt have to be in their currency, just like we made every debt had to be in our currency. They're going to make it so that you can trade land in exchange for military bases. So now it's like, oh, you know what? We'll build your schools, we'll build your runway.
They're already doing that. Highways through Africa, this infrastructure project in South America.
The Belt Road Initiative. They're already doing it. They've been testing it in the third world for 20 years. And it's been hugely successful, with the exception of the fact that there's a debt crisis because of it, right? But it's been hugely successful in the third world. So if the United States loses NATO, then NATO has to partner with somebody. Guess who their #1 trade partner is? In Germany and France.
China.
Guess who our #1 trade partner is?
Who?
China.
China? See, and that's why I'm like, well, how can there be conflict if we all depend on each other? You know what I mean? Like, that was the whole theory about, going back to Adam Smith and capitalism. Free trade makes a rising tide that lifts all boats.
It's true. It's true, but the tide is not equal to everybody, because the boats are not equal.
Okay, so because they say, going back to a Starbucks on the corner, when a coffee bean pops up across the street, it's actually good for business, because now you have more people coming to the area to get coffee, and it actually creates more customers for everyone.
For everyone except Starbucks.
No. If more people are coming, though, just mathematically, more people that weren't coming to the area before are there now. So some are going to, it's surely going to be, some of those people are going to go to Starbucks.
And that's where you have to actually do the real analytics.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Because to use your exact example, right? Here's one street corner. That one street corner only has X number of people that are within walking distance of that street corner. And let's just keep it simple and say only walking distance.
Right.
Those people can always walk to that street corner. So when there was a Starbucks on that street corner, if people came to that street corner, they went there for Starbucks, or they went there to buy leather shops or shoes or whatever else, right? When there's a coffee bean that opens on the other side, part of the Starbucks consumers are now going to the coffee bean, but all the other businesses benefit because the leather shops and the shoe stores have more people coming.
Right.
The only one that really loses is Starbucks, because while there might be a 10% increase in foot traffic, only 1% of that increase is going to Starbucks.
Okay. So
8% of that increase is going to coffee beans.
So the rest of the world stands to benefit, especially this global South, especially the third world, from this competition between China and America. Americans are the ones who are going to see our standards of living go down. That's what it sounds like to you. So
it depends on how, again, I don't know what you're defining as standard of living.
Okay.
You're not going to see, it's not like your roads are going to stop being built or electricity is going to stop. We're not going to turn into the third world.
Right.
But what it does mean is like your children might have to learn Chinese.